Trump surrendered to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office this afternoon and later appeared before a judge for his arraignment, where he entered a not guilty plea. This was a surreal scene for a man who once occupied the Oval Office and who is mounting a third run for the White House. Here to help us make sense of today's historic moment is criminal defense attorney Muttaqi Akbar and Republican political commentator Melanie Collette. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with you, Muttaqi. Help us understand what was unveiled today in this 34-count indictment.
So in the indictment, he was charged with 34 different counts, pretty much of the same thing, just different incidents of falsifying business records in the first degree. And I went and, kind of dug up some research for dealing with New York law. And pretty much what it says is that you make a false entry into the business record, which by itself would be a misdemeanor. But if you make that false record in the business record and all with the intent to defraud, and that defraud could include the intent to hide another crime, then it makes it a felony, which is punishable by up to 4 years. So what they did was, for each time that Donald Trump wrote a check to cover up the payments that he made to, or the alleged payments that were made to Stormy Daniels and the other lady, for each check that was written, he got a count for that, for each one. And sometimes prosecutors do that. They break it down by each individual act. And they also had the option to put it all into one count and just spread it out. Just say that from February of 2017 up until December 2017, this happened, but instead they broke it down into 34 different counts. So that's what the indictment was all about. Typically, 100% of the time, almost at the arraignment, which is what he had today, there's a plea of not guilty. So there was no surprise about that. So it was set for trial, and we'll see what happens from there.
So we're hearing, Muttaqi, that Trump's team plans to file a plethora, which means a whole lot, of motions challenging the indictment, challenging, as you said, the felony, because they're saying that the bump from the misdemeanor to the felony is based on, and they're going to make the argument, some are saying that it's based on federal election law, and that the New York State legislature, in writing its statutes, criminal statutes, did not intend for the underlying crime that elevates this false business record claim from a misdemeanor to a felony. The underlying crime was not meant to be a federal violation of a federal statute. In addition to that motion, which everybody expects to come from Trump's team, what other motions do you expect Trump's team to file to challenge the indictment?
Well, I think that'll be the first one. And when I was reading it, I was looking at it to say, okay, what was the crime that he intended to cover up, or what was the fraud? If he's paying somebody off, how is that necessarily a fraud? But you're right, it is up under the election law because, as far as like trying to hide something and using, whatever payments in order to try to hide that information. It is going to be interesting, though, because I'm not sure how it kind of like goes into it being an election law, some type of election fraud. So I think it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be close as far as what the judge decides to do with that. But a motion to dismiss is something that most criminal defense attorneys do. I wholeheartedly expect that it happens. A judge can either have a hearing, a full-out hearing for it to hear it, or a judge can just summarily dismiss it and just say, hey, that's something for a jury to decide. So we'll see how this particular judge handles it.
How likely is it, or how usual or rare is it that an entire indictment is thrown out pre-trial? Criminal defense.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was about to say it's very rare that a judge would do that because as long as the elements are there, the elements of the crime are there, and that the government can show what those elements are and that there are facts to support it, then the judge will let it move forward.
Okay. So not likely that he wins at this pretrial motion. I know there's also talk, which I find so ironic, Melanie, there's talk that he's going to file a motion for a change of venue, arguing that he cannot get a fair trial in his home state and city of New York. Now, this is the city where he used to brag about buildings, being all over the place that had Trump's name on it, and where he threw infamous parties, and he talked about New York being the place that loved him. And now he's saying, in the place that loved me so much, I can't get a fair trial. Does that shock you, Melanie, that he's saying New York, of all places, can't be fair to him?
No, it's actually not that ironic when you consider that they stopped loving him the moment he ran as a Republican. They stopped being his friend when he ran as a Republican. When I think something like, 87% of the constituents in that area in New York vote Democrat. That is not surprising at all. I think many people who kind of, for a lack of a better expression, come out as a Republican, these things do happen. So it's really not all that shocking. What really is shocking, and what I think we should be concerned about as people who want to be unified, as a country, is why people are making those types of decisions, why people are dissing other people because of their political affiliations. Why is that happening? Why is, this whole thing made me think of Mariah Carey, because Alvin Bragg was talking about how I've sued him 100 times. Like, why are you so obsessed, dude? That's like admitting after a breakup that you drove by a dude's house 100 times and you still got no play. Like, I would never, if I did that, if I was that pressed, I would never tell anyone. Just saying.
Well, Melanie, maybe he wasn't bragging about it. Maybe he's just stating the facts, and maybe the dude has done something that warranted him being investigated at the level that he's been investigated and sued at the level that he's been sued. I think Mutake Alvin Bragg did something that I thought was brilliant in his press conference. And he put into context this falsifying business records for the very reason that Melanie just stated, because he knew that Republicans were going to say that this was political persecution, that he was being singled out, that this is a BS charge. Who cares? It's a crime without a victim. It's kind of a victimless crime. And what he said was, look, this is New York City. This is the financial capital of the world. And this is the bread and butter white collar crimes that we prosecute all day long. Because in New York City, whether it's trying to cover up financial crimes or sex crimes or election crimes, these are the kinds of cases that we bring. And no, it's not unusual for us to bring these kinds of cases. And we file them routinely. What do you make of that, Mutake, and Alvin Bragg trying to get ahead of this argument that somehow Donald Trump has been singled out?
I agree with you. I think that was his way of kind of, quieting that rhetoric down, of saying that he was singled out. And he kind of lined it up and said, look, whenever, like you said, it's a sex crime, if it's a financial crime, anytime that we have an issue, we look at, did they falsify business records? And if they did they do it in a way to try to hide something else or defraud the government in some kind of way? And if it's there, they charge it. If it's not, they don't. And it's just one of those things that they charge often in New York City. And again, and I think that does two things. One, it shows that Donald Trump is not being singled out. Two, it says, look, we know what we're doing, and we're prepared to fight this charge, and we know we have the facts in order to get a jury at the end of it to find this man guilty based on these facts. And I think, Alvin Bragg, he made it a point to say he's been practicing for 24 years as a prosecutor that entire time. I think he knows what's on the line as far as, one, his own integrity and reputation, and two, I think we all know if you try to shoot at the king, you better not miss. And I think, whatever circle that you're in, you understand that Trump, can be identified as a king, especially in New York City, no matter what his popularity is. And I know he thought it through, and he knows that, he better not miss, and he's familiar enough with this statute and this law in order to go after him with this.
Yeah, Melanie, I guess what's so shocking to me is here are Republicans, Kevin McCarthy, and all these other, Ron DeSantis, they're expressing all of this outrage, and on the Capitol, they say they're going to investigate Alvin Bragg, which, Republicans typically are the biggest states' rights proponents, but now all of a sudden they're going to use the federal government and the power of the federal government to try, which I don't think they'll be successful, but to try to interfere in what's happening in a state court prosecution, which the federal government has absolutely zero power over. And Mr. Bragg said, look, bring it on. I'm ready for it. But
no, he didn't. No, that's not what he said. What he said was, I'm not going to talk to y'all. I'm not talking to y'all. I don't want to talk to y'all. You're interfering. He actually said he's not going to talk to them. He's refused to speak to them. He did not say
refused to speak to him because they have no jurisdiction over him. They have no power over him.
Just and like he doesn't have any jurisdiction over that federal law that he's trying to tie to make it a felony. Hold on a second.
He has no power over the Congress has no power over him, which is why by him not addressing them, that is his way of saying, bring it on. Well, I'll see you in court. And let's be clear, the indictment doesn't solely rest on federal law. Mr. Bragg was very clear in that press conference that Trump violated New York tax codes. And so he is able to rely on that violation of that New York statute to bump what otherwise would be a misdemeanor up to a felony. But I want to ask you, Melanie, I don't understand the hypocrisy of these Republicans. Here is a man that's covering up two affairs, and you can't deny that. And
that's not illegal.
That's not illegal. I didn't ask you. Melanie, you got to listen to the question. He said it on the plane to Michael Cohen. He said it. Well, he didn't say it to Michael Cohen, but he said it on the plane. I wasn't doing it to influence the election. That's what he says. We don't believe him. But he says, I did it so my wife wouldn't find out. But I want to ask you about the hypocrisy, not the legal issue. I want to ask you, here is the Republicans that are supposed to be the family values party, the party that believed in family values. They criticize poor single Black mothers for having kids without having fathers in the home. They criticizes folks for having what they call, sex out of marriage. Here is that party who is standing by the man who admits to have covered up affairs that he had while he was married, has been twice impeached and now indicted. And they're saying, we still want him to be our president. Help us understand that. 2
failed impeachments, to be clear. 2 failed impeachments. And nobody is saying that he was right morally for having an affair if he had an affair. And they had a non-disclosure agreement, is my understanding. So of course you're not going to talk about it. It was a nuisance lawsuit. So of course he wanted to pay it off and didn't want to bother his wife with something like that. But no, you can support not being indicted for your personal, failures, if you will, and also think that, this is a bad prosecution. No other person under these same set of circumstances would have been indicted. Not to mention, and I'm just going to say this, Republicans do not, as a whole, like you're painting Republicans as a blanket, blame Black mothers for being single mothers. What they say is 70% of poverty, one of the markers for poverty is not having a father in a home, not finishing high school. Those are the markers for continuing poverty. Nobody that I know, no Republicans that I know, are pointing at single Black mothers and saying that they're horrible people for having babies out of wedlock. And not for nothing, if we're going to talk about the moms, we also have to talk about the dad, because as far as I know, I'm not a biologist, but I don't think that women are having babies by themselves. Let's
just stay on the point, Melanie. First of all, that's categorically untrue. But the question I'm asking you is about supporting him for president. I'm not saying supporting him to be a dog catcher or to run your neighborhood homeowners association. This is the man you want to serve as the president of the most powerful nation in the world. We want to put him out to world leaders. So you can't be an adulterer
and serve as president? I seem to remember a very well-known, well-liked hero of the Democrat Party known as Bill Clinton, who was a very famous philanderer and adulterer, and I don't see him getting shade for that.
Oh, he got plenty of shade for that. But let's be clear. Let's compare apples. Melanie, let's compare apples.
Though, right?
But let's compare apples to apples. Bill Clinton was not impeached twice, and nor has he been indicted in a 13 or 34 count indictment. Well, let me ask you this.
It's a fluffy indictment.
It's nothing fluffy about it. It's a very serious indictment, and he seemingly knows that, which is why he was so somber in that courthouse. Mutaki, what do you make of Republicans who are trying to dismiss the indictment? You're a criminal defense attorney. Is this a nothing indictment? Is this something, Donald Trump can walk away from, or are these serious charges where he could be facing serious jail time?
I think they are serious charges. I think, anything from a misdemeanor to a felony is a serious charge. I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk for the government either. And that's me as a criminal defense attorney. I think they will have to, and it's one of those things that's going to be all or nothing. So if his theory is correct on count 1, it's going to be correct on count 34. So it's really going to come down to, did he falsify business records? And I think that will be clear. What I do think they're going to really have to show and prove was his intent to falsify those records, was his intent to defraud or hide another crime. And he kind of anticipated that by saying, hey, I just didn't want my wife to see it, as opposed to, I was trying to, hide this tax violation, or I was trying to hide from these election laws. So, and we have to remember the government has to prove the case. They have the burden to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So if they can throw in, if Trump's lawyers, and I'm sure they're going to be prepared, those in any reasonable doubt, then it goes to Trump. So I don't think it's completely dismissive, the fact that it got this far and that he was charged, but I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk for the government either, where he's going to be automatically trying to take a plea. And I just want to make one more point before you step in, Melanie, that I think the Democrats, actually should take some cues from the Republicans when it comes to their allegiance to different members in their party, no matter what. They will defend their other party members no matter what. And, even DeSantis, his own opponent, my governor down here in Florida, it was willing to not extradite Trump, and saying that these were trumped up charges, just pardon the pun. And, and that's his opponent, that the next day Trump had commercials going against DeSantis, and he's still defending them. So I think the Democrats need to take a cue. Like, whenever a Democrat is bought down or indicted even, or, bad news come out, we turn against them immediately. But with Republicans, they stick together no matter what. No matter if it's the adulterer that says grab them by whatever, they're going to stick with that person and try to justify morally, or, no matter what. So I think the Democrats should take a cue to stick to the same way the Republicans do.
I want to correct something. Hold on a second, Melanie. I want to make a correction so we make sure we all are talking about the facts, because facts do matter. Bragg, in explaining the predicates for the felony, said the first is New York state election law, not federal, New York state election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. He said, I further indicated a number of unlawful means, including additional false statements, including statements that were planned to be made to tax authorities. He noted the federal election law cap on contribution limits. So it's important that we note that the predicates is New York state tax law and New York state election law, and federal election law only comes in as it relates to the cap on contribution limits. When we come forward, more on the historic indictment of former President Donald Trump, right here on KBLA Talk 1580.